there's been some news overtaking what's happening, of course, in the Ukraine and those firing of those missiles. What do you make of that, and how is this going to complicate matters?
Well, what we know right now is that Poland has confirmed that there were 2 explosions that took place in Poland. It has not confirmed exactly what the source of those explosions were. The Associated Press reported, and they cited a single senior U.S. intelligence source. They said that it was, in fact, a Russian missile strike or rocket strike, some sort of projectile. But it's not yet clear the extent of that.
That would mean a lot of things, right? And this is something Martin's watching very closely as well. Martin?
Yeah, Ted, good morning. Good to see you again. So I guess what we really need to nail down is, although the Polish government has confirmed, yep, there were 2 explosions, we need to nail down, A, if they were missiles, B, if they were Russian missiles or not, and C, whether or not the firings were they just stray missiles or was it intentional? Because if C is true, the risk is this war could be crossing borders and involving Poland now. I mean, it's a lot of dotted lines to get across, but I mean, that is the tail risk, yes?
Yeah, it is. And Poland is a NATO member. And not only is Poland a NATO member, but it's one of the NATO members with one of the more sort of bellicose relationships with Russia historically. Martin, this is what people are talking about when they say that situations like this can inadvertently escalate. That's the big concern right now. Biden is speaking with President Duda of Poland about the topic. They've gotten on the horn and started talking to each other. The French have put out a statement on it as well. I was thinking about this. It's actually probably a good thing that all of these leaders are gathered in one place right now at the G20 because they can actually communicate face-to-face on this. Because you're right, it's a serious concern.
Indeed, and the biggest example of this face-to-face, in-person diplomacy, obviously, is just before the summit here in Bali at the G20, and that was President Biden meeting with President Xi of China. How do you assess how that meeting went?
I think that the G20 is supposed to be about the economy. We didn't see anything come out of this meeting that was about the economy, about economic policy or trade policy, but there are people who feel that this was a fairly good result regardless, because we saw Xi and Biden steer the conversation away from the sort of trajectory that it has been on for some time, which is one of escalating, language, verbiage, a lot of talk about Taiwan. You have people talking about, the inevitability of some sort of conflict around Taiwan, and they made it clear that they don't want to see anything like that. And so even if they didn't come out and say anything that, substantive about trade, there are going to be a lot of people who are going to be very glad to see that sort of worst case scenario addressed and sort of taken off the table.
Yeah, Ted, for me, I mean, and I agree, a lot of people are saying that the best thing about this meeting is that it happened in the first place, right? That the president and President Xi met in person, face-to-face, and nothing beats that kind of diplomacy after only virtual contact for about a year or so. The other thing that caught my attention, and I think is positive, and I want your take on this, is that they agreed to, at the very least, continue contact or actually reestablish contact between both sides at a working level. I know the president was talking about some sort of either a committee or task force, etc., across both sides that they're agreed on that will work together to try and defuse tensions or avoid crossing red lines in all areas of the relationship, whether it's tech or trade or Taiwan or North Korea. That sounds positive to me, no?
Yeah, it is. And, it's actually something that's been quietly going on for a couple weeks now. There have been these meetings between various cabinet level or, say, foreign ministry level officials in the United States and in China. And if you're going to really have a functional relationship, you need to sort of have these conversations going on where the rubber hits the road. It's not just the top guys. You want to have your Anthony Blinkens and your Jake Sullivans involved in those conversations as well. And it looks like there's a genuine effort right now on both sides for those conversations to take place. For a while, after Nancy Pelosi visited Taiwan, there was a sort of, there was a silence on that level, coming from the Chinese side in particular. But that appears to be thawing right now.
Indeed. So, yeah, reestablishing contact at a personal senior between presidents and leaders level, as well as at a working group level, can only be a good thing. I totally agree with you on that. And, of course, we have to note that Secretary Blinken is going to be flying to China early next year. So that's probably positive as well. Ted, very quickly before we let you go, we've been talking about this down here at the G20 and to do with these task forces or working groups, how the U.S. side is going to staff them. Because under former President Trump, of course, and former Secretary of State Mike Pompeo, we had a sort of a hollowing out of state. There was an exodus. A lot of people left, did they not? So you got to worry about that. And two, at a very senior level, you mentioned Jake Sullivan, the National Security Advisor, and also Secretary Blinken. They're the guys that are on the foreign policy beat with the president and obviously have his ear. Both of them are sort of Europe, Soviet Atlanticists, are they not? They're not in particular Asia guys. And the only real Asia guy I can think of is Kurt Campbell. And the issue with that is he's a China hawk, is he not?
Yeah, he is. You're right about the State Department, and that's under discussed. They not only did they see a hollowing out, they had a hard time recruiting. I have sources at the State Department that go back to the beginning of the Trump era. And it was specifically about Trump. There were a lot of people who just didn't want to work for the guy. So they do have some catching up to do. I think that there's been an effort made to bring in, and this goes back to the Obama administration, at least in fits and starts, there's been an effort made on the U.S. side to gain that greater Asia expertise in-house, but is it something that's going to happen quickly? Probably not. I'm sure they've made up a lot of lost ground since Biden became president, but they've probably got a ways to go.
Okay, Ted, so you're here. What else is trending on CNBC.com? I'm guessing that Ukraine missiles crossing into Poland is going to be big.
Yes, it is. That is by far the biggest story. In fact, not only is our Ukraine Live blog the biggest story right now, and the headline is, as you would expect, examining that Poland situation, but also a video, a CNBC video from a Pentagon briefing about the I don't want to say attack, but the explosion. And by the way, in that video, the Pentagon spokesman says, at this time, we just don't know very much. And I think that's important to remember because right now, there's not a lot that's been confirmed. And then the third biggest story, despite all of it, that inflation number was exactly what the markets wanted to hear. And so despite the fears that you might expect coming out of Poland, markets finished higher in the U.S. pretty much across the board.